Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, members of E.ה. Good evening, members of Friends of the Stiftung, Friends of Ethiopia. I would like to welcome you tonight to this first part of the discussion series titled New Hope for Democratic and Peaceful Elections in Ethiopia, ? The discussion series is conducted together with Ethioberlin.e.V, the Landeszentrale für politische Bildung, Berlin. The cooperation has been in planning since beginning of last November. Since then, a lot has happened in Ethiopia, and many concerning and also sometimes disturbing news are reaching us almost on a daily basis from the country. We hear about large-scale human suffering, human rights abuses, a threatening humanitarian crisis. The international community has been trying hard to gain full humanitarian access to those in need and is advocating also for a ceasefire. Just today, the United Nations Security Council called for investigations into atrocities and for unrestricted aid access. Apart from the Tigray crisis, other conflicts ignited and add to the human suffering too. The involvement of neighboring Eritrea and the standoff with neighboring Sudan and also Egypt suggest a threat of regionalization of the conflicts. Whether the national elections planned for June can meet basic requirements and whether they can be conducted free, fair, and peacefully is increasingly being questioned. The conflict in Tigray, erupting violence in other regions, long simmering systemic challenges in the country, but also the imprisonment of opposition members, and up to now, a very low voter registration continue to raise concerns about the planned elections. Today's focus is to have a closer look at the system of ethnic federalism, the party landscape, and electoral laws and procedures for post-election dispute resolution. We find it important to get an overview of the historical, legal, and constitutional basis of elections in Ethiopia. In addition, I also encourage you to ask further questions surrounding the elections and its current setting. We can observe that the current situation in Ethiopia is extremely polarized. There has been a lot of mis and disinformation. Nonetheless, or even despite that, we as Friedrich-Ebert Stiftung think that discussion and dialogue among different stakeholders must be possible, also among some which hold views which we do not necessarily share. We believe dialogue remains essential. I'm sure we will have some interesting inputs that steer up further questions concerning the elections in Ethiopia. The meeting will be recorded for your information, please. And one other request, please do not carry out any of the contents of this discussion on social media without prior authorization. Thank you very much. And now I will hand over to our today's moderator.
Good afternoon. I think I'll give first the word to our chairman, Tadesse, who is the chair of the Ethioberlin Association.
So, good evening, everybody. First of all, in the name of Ethioberlin community, I kindly welcome everybody to this discussion. Ethioberlin community is an association of mostly Ethiopians living in Berlin. We founded this association in 2014 to offer our children opportunity to engage with culture, language, and sport. This year we added a discussion series. As you already know, Ethiopia currently faces several sincere problems. Analysis and discussions are very important to understand the situation, the context, the actors, and competing ideas for solutions. Hence, we are very happy and fortunate to have found with the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung a partner that is well experienced in the exercise. We are also well aware of the decades-long work of the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung to create room for political discussion and participation that are so important for the development of democratic societies. The Friedrich Ebert Stiftung office in Addis Ababa is providing room for open debates. We are witnessing the current divisions and fights among a usually peace-loving people in Ethiopia and the diaspora. Ethioberlin community is independent of political or ethnic affiliations. We are interested in peace and democracy. With this discussion, we want to engage with each other by exchanging ideas through speaking and, more importantly, through listening. Today is a first event in a series of 3. We will continue this discussion in June and August. Hence, we especially welcome and thank Heinrich Mayak, Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, Referatsleiter Afrika, as well as Ulrich Thum and Sven de Eickhoff for their time and kindly support in preparing this event. We also thank the Berliner Landeszentrale für politische Bildung for their financial support. It is our honor to have won Dr. Berihun Adunya Gebeye and PhD candidate Jalale Getachew Beru as panelists to discuss the chance of peaceful election in Ethiopia. Ethioberlin member and today's moderator Haile Mengesha will introduce them. I welcome everybody and we wish us all open and fruitful discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, our Chairman Tadesse. I will be your moderator as it has been said before. So my name is Haile Mengesha. I'll be hosting you today for the whole session. We are happy that a lot of guests are in the audience and we welcome you everybody. As you know, this event is organized, that it has been spoken before, by the Berlin Verein Association in cooperation and support from the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung and the Berliner Landeszentrale. So it is obvious in Ethiopia, election is scheduled to take place coming June 2021. Last year, the election had to be postponed because of the corona outbreak. There is high expectation that this election will be the first peaceful, free and fair election in the history of the country. The last election, which took place in 2005, resulted in a state of violence and mass unrest and in criminalizing the opposition party members by the ruling government. After the reform came 3 years ago and Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed came to power, he promised to reform and to govern the country by rule and law and has started to open up the political space. Now, after 3 years, when the election day is approaching, questions are arising. In the light of 30 years ethnical division in the country, getting worse nowadays, are peaceful, free and fair elections possible at all in Ethiopia? What does the political situation look like in the country? What does the party's landscape look like at all? How far have electoral laws been reformed? And are procedures for post-election dispute settlement in place? In order to discuss this and to answer your questions, we have invited two renowned scholars as speakers. They are Jalele Getachew from Thüringen, Germany, and Dr. Berihun Adunya from Heidelberg. Before passing the floor to the scholars in order to deliver their presentations, short briefing about the program. As it is well informed to you, this is a closed Zoom meeting where all microphones are closed except the speakers and of course mine as moderator. You have the opportunity to deliver your comments and questions by using your chat window. Please send them and we will deliver the question to the speakers so that they can reply on it. The total Zoom meeting approximately might take around 90 minutes, which for each scholar is planned to deliver a presentation of 15-20 minutes. After that, we go straight to the questions and then afterwards we follow to the discussions. So let's go to the first speaker, Dr. Birhanu Adunya Gebeye. A short biography. Dr. Berihun Adunya is currently the Alexander von Humboldt Fellow at the Max Planck Institute for Comparative Public Law and International Law in Heidelberg. Previously, he has been a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Göttingen. He was a visiting scholar at different universities and institutions in the world, like in Central European University, Columbia University Law School, Oxford University Social Legal Studies, and Yangon University. Dr. Berihun has received several awards and fellowship from different institutions, such as the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation, Open Society Foundation, Central European University, Melbourne Law School, McGill University Faculty of Law, and Institute of Global Law and Policy at Harvard School. His publications in the field of comparative constitutional law, federalism, human rights, international law, law and development, all his publications appeared in different global and journals and scripts in the different places in the world. Dr. Berihun Adunya has taught constitutional law, constitutional building, constitutional politics, human rights, and international law, mainly with an African perspective at different universities, including the University of Göttingen, Central European University, University of Yangon, and Jijiga University. Dr. Berihun received his PhD in comparative constitutional law and from Central European University and from Addis Ababa University in addition, and from Haramaya University. All his publications can be found at the website of Berihun Gebeye.com Research Hotmail. I now request Dr. Berihun Adunya to deliver his presentation.
Thank you so much, Ato Haile Mengesha, for this generous introduction. And I also would like to thank Ethioberlin and all the organizers and partners, FES, for inviting me to speak on this important matter. The topic that I'm asked to speak today is whether there is a new hope for democratic and peaceful elections in Ethiopia. I will give you a general overview of the previous 5 national elections and present the changes and continuities in the upcoming election. And then we will see whether the upcoming election could be democratic and peaceful. Since the adoption of the federal constitution in 1995, Ethiopia has conducted 5 national elections. EPRDF, a coalition of ethnic-based parties, along with its other 5 sister parties, won all the elections by a large margin. In the first national election, EPRDF won more than 90% of the seats in parliament. In the second national election, it won around 95% of the seats. And in the third 2005 election, which was relatively open and competitive, while the opposition won a significant number of seats in the House of People's Representatives and all seats in Addis Ababa, the EPRDF declared itself as the winner of the election, even before half of the votes were counted. This led to a post-election violence, and several opposition political party leaders, including the current chairperson of the National Election Board, were jailed, convicted, and released on pardon. In the fourth national election, which was not open and competitive at all, the EPRDF won 98.6% of the seats. And in the last 2015 fifth national election, the EPRDF won 100% of the seats in parliament and transformed Ethiopia into officially a one-party parliament, which is still operational today. So it is important to see the political party landscape and how the EPRDF won all the previous national elections. EPRDF won all the previous elections primarily for 2 reasons. One is related to the weakness of the opposition, and the other is related to the abuse of incumbency and electoral manipulation by the EPRDF. Since 1991, more than 100 political parties have been established in Ethiopia. And many of these parties are organized along ethno-linguistic lines and have had a limited chance to compete with the EPRDF. While there are some national multi-ethnic parties, these parties have different limitations, including financial and other, to operate throughout the country and compete with the EPRDF. During election time, many opposition political parties form a coalition to challenge the EPRDF in a united manner. But these coalitions usually fail either due to internal party struggle or external government interference. So many of these parties choose not to participate in elections. For example, many prominent political parties boycotted the 1994 election to the Constituent Assembly that adopted the 1995 Constitution and the first national election that came after that. Some of them participated in the second national election only to avoid cancellation if they failed to participate in 2 consecutive elections. They would be cancelled. So in order to maintain their legal status, they participated in elections. But the most important reason why EPRDF won all these elections by a large margin is due to its incumbency advantage and also manipulation of elections. One, EPRDF had a favorable electoral system. Under the Constitution and the then electoral law, members of parliament are elected for a 5-year term in single-member constituencies based on the plurality of votes cast, which means first past the post or the winner takes all the votes. opposition parties have been asking for the change of this electoral system to proportional representation, where seats are allocated in proportion of the voters. But EPRDF was not willing to change this electoral law. The second is lack of an independent national election board. According to the Constitution, the Prime Minister nominates members of the National Election Board, and then the Parliament would confirm the nomination. Opposition political parties, civil society actors, and other stakeholders had no say in the appointment of members of the board. And for the past 5 national elections, the National Election Board was not an impartial arbiter of elections in the country. It always favors the ruling party. Its main task has been legitimizing the elections of the EPRDF. The third, and perhaps the most important reason why EPRDF won all those elections is due to the use of government resources by the ruling party. The EPRDF uses state resources such as public money, the media, government institutions, including the police and the security apparatus for its own party purposes, including to rig elections. The opposition had no access to any of these resources and institutions. All these factors destined the EPRDF to be the winner of all the previous elections. Then what changed in the upcoming 6th national election? What is new? A few months after the 5th national election, protest movements erupted in different parts of the country, which forced the former Prime Minister Haile to resign, and the selection of Abiy Ahmed as Prime Minister in April 2018. This change in leadership has brought about political, legal, security, and to some extent even social changes in the country. There are 2 main political changes. The first is the transformation of the EPRDF into a unified prosperity party in 2019 by including the ruling parties of all the 5 regional states, formerly called sister parties to the EPRDF. The unification of the coalition created somehow some tension between the Prosperity Party and the TPLF, and also within the Oromo Prosperity Party itself. TPLF declined to join the new party, and some members of the Oromo Prosperity Party, such as Lamma Magarsa, registered his opposition, but ultimately he was removed from his party and government position. The second main political change was the entrance of former armed groups such as the Oromo Liberation Front, the Ogaden National Liberation Front, Gumbot 7, and other opposition parties in exile into Ethiopia. Unlike others, the OLF entered the country with its own armed forces. Later, the armed wing of the OLF, which calls itself the Oromo Liberation Army, separated from OLF, and has been engaged with an armed struggle, especially in Western Oromia. Gumbot 7, in collaboration with other parties, established a new party called Ethiopian Citizens for Social Justice, or እ.ኤ.አ, and there are also other political parties, such as the National Movement of Amhara, NAMA, Balderas for True Democracy, and Innat Party, among many others. Overall, there were close to 130 political parties which planned to participate in this election, but only 53 of them could participate in the upcoming election according to the new electoral law, which I will talk about in a minute. So in terms of the political party landscape, both the ruling party and the opposition are new in some significant ways. There are 2 important election-related legal reforms. The first is related to the National Election Board, and the second is related to the electoral law. One of the main changes in the new National Election Board Establishment Proclamation is the attempt to improve the credibility of the board by guaranteeing its institutional independence and improving its capacity. The appointment process of members of the board is key here. The new law provides that the Prime Minister should establish a committee composed of Interreligious Council of Ethiopia, Ethiopian Academy of Sciences, Ethiopian Confederation of Employees, and many other civil societies to nominate members of the board. This committee, in its recruitment process, receives nominations from the public, political organizations, and civil societies. After the recruitment committee sends the list of nominations to the Prime Minister must consult with representatives of competing political parties to finally choose those who may be nominated for the board after the Parliament's approval. So the current members of the National Election Board are appointed through this process and fairly enjoy public credibility and sense of independence thus far. Additionally, the members of the board work on a full-time basis. The board has its own office of the board, run by a chief executive officer and a deputy chief executive officer, and they also have regional branches in different parts of the country. All these can build the capacity of the National Election Board to execute its duties more efficiently and effectively. The other legal reform is related to the electoral law. Now we have a very detailed 167 articles long electoral law that deals with elections, political party registration, and elections code of conduct. Yet the first past the post or the winner takes all electoral system remains unchanged. And this has been problematic from the perspective of opposition political parties. Additionally, the electoral law obliges all political parties to go through a new process of certification within a timeline set by the board. The most contested new criteria under the new electoral law is the requirement to have at least 10,000 founding members for national parties, of whom a maximum of 40% are permanent residents of a single region, and the remaining are permanent residents of at least 4 regions within a minimum of 50% distribution. Similarly, regional parties are required to have 4,000 founding members, more than 60% of whom need to be permanent residents of a region. And these electoral rules decrease the number of political parties from 130 to 53. While these legal and political changes have by and large positive impact for the upcoming national election, they have also carried over old problems. But there are also some security challenges that can greatly impact the upcoming election. There are 2 security challenges. The first one is internal and the other one is external. The internal security challenge has many phases. The Tigray conflict is the main one in this regard, and for this reason, there will not be election in Tigray region. But the deteriorating security situation in different parts of Oromia, Amhara, Benishangul Gumuz, and some parts of the southern region, Afar, Somali, may be also a challenge in conducting the election peacefully. In this regard, the National Election Board originally planned to conduct the election in 50,000 polling stations, but only half of them are registering voters due to the security situation in different parts of the country. The external security challenge is related to the border issue with Sudan and the GERD, or the Renaissance Dam. Sudan's military forces have already occupied parts of Ethiopian land since the beginning of November last year, and there is an intense diplomatic relationship related to the second filling of the GERD. All this could pose a significant security challenge. Most importantly, there are also some social changes. Of course, Ethiopians are known to live together in bad and good times for centuries. However, the recent rise of ethnic nationalism ethnic and religious targeted attacks have been challenging this social fabric. So overall, Ethiopia will be conducting the upcoming election in this political, legal security, and social situations. So is there any hope for democratic and peaceful elections in Ethiopia? Well, this depends on what the government, political parties, the people, and civil society actors will do before, during, and after the election. The Oromo Federalist Congress and the Oromo Liberation Front, the major parties in Oromia, boycotted the election, alleging that many of their members and leaders are jailed, their offices closed, and they couldn't freely perform their political activities. Still, conflict and ethnic targeted killings and displacements continue. For example, additionally, the public interest to participate in the upcoming election seems to be low. For example, less than 300,000 individuals registered to vote in Addis Ababa so far, and the city has more than 5 million people. And this data is some days ago. So numbers may increase. Popular protests erupted in different parts of Amara region, protesting the ethnic targeted killings of Amaras in different parts of the country that continues for 5 consecutive days, and it seems to be continuing. So if things continue like this, it may be difficult to conduct the election in a peaceful and democratic manner, and things could even be more complicated after the election. Thanks so much, and I would be happy to discuss further.
Thank you very much, Dr. Barihun, for the brief presentation. I now continue to our next scholar, which is Jalele Getachew Bru. Short biography about Jalele. Jalele Getachew Bru, who is a doctoral candidate doing her research work in Erfurt, Germany, at the well-known Willy Brandt School of Public Policy, University of Erfurt. Her research project, titled Replacing the Breaking of Heads with Counting of Heads, Managing the Conflict Triggering Elements of Liberal Peace Theory. Jalele Getachew is a holder of a Master of Public Policy from the same Willy Brandt School of Public Policy University in Erfurt. She accomplished her Bachelor of Laws, LLB, and graduated at the Haramaya University in Ethiopia. Jalele Getachew had gathered wide experience in her capacity as public prosecutor and as an attaché in international law and advisory as a peace project officer in different places of the world. She has worked in addition as research assistants at different institutions, in different countries, in different places, including the United States of America, in Europe, in Germany. Her research priorities or interest is more, for example, peace and institution building, elections, post-conflict countries, democratization, traditional conflict resolution methods, and last not least, international law. I now request Jalele Getachew to deliver her presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Haile, for the nice introduction. Thank you, everyone. Today, I'm here to talk about the post-election period by comparing it with the 2005 election, post-conflict dispute. So I would like to share my PowerPoint with you. Hopefully you can see it. So before I jump to the 2005 election, I will give a brief introduction. And then after I talk about the 2005 general election, I will come back to the current or the upcoming general election. So just to give you a brief introduction, election is not a one-day event. It's actually a cycle which includes 3 periods: pre-election period, election period, and post-election period. The pre-election period, for instance, includes establishing the electoral management bodies, rules and regulations, and so on. The election period is actually the election day, the one day. And then the post-election period consists, for instance, counting the votes and also assessing what happened during the election day, and then comes back to maybe adopting new rules and regulation, and the cycle goes on. The other thing I want to bring to your attention is that there are 3 kinds of electoral institutions, which are institutions. The first one is the rules and regulation of election. That's one institution. The second one is the institution which enforces the rules and regulation of election. The third institution is the institution which is in charge of resolving any election-related disputes. So this is just to give you a brief introduction, because I might mention some of these terms. Just to give you a brief introduction, what electoral dispute and violence is. Electoral dispute are dispute over election, of course, which might occur at any stage of the election period. Electoral violence is a deliberate use of threat or actual physical harm to delay or influence an electoral process. So it's not only about people demonstrating and when the government is trying to crack this demonstration related with election. It's different kinds of threat and actual physical harm. That's what electoral violence is. So there are, let me tell you, there are 3 kinds of electoral dispute and violences. The first one is pre-election dispute and violence. This is mostly related with voter registration, or it might be caused by a disagreement within a party or during a campaigning period and so on. Election day dispute and violence. This occurs during the election day when the vote is being conducted, and it might be by attacking voters or candidates and or polling stations and so on, just to disturb the election process. The third one is post-election dispute, which is after the election day. It might be caused because of 2 reasons. The first one is it might be caused because of dispute over the outcome of the election, or it might be caused because of the electoral system, which most studies or researchers agree that if the electoral system is winner-takes-all system, there is a higher chance for a violent election. When we talk about the 2005 general election, as my colleague stated, is the 3rd election after እ.ኤ.አ came into power. And the 2005 general election is considered as the most democratic election. There were 70 political parties. The main contestants or parties during the 2005 election was እ.ኤ.አ, ህብረት, and ቅንጅት parties. And I will only specifically focus on post-election dispute and violence for the 2005 election. Just to give you a brief background on the 2005 election, what was the rules and regulation of settling post-electoral dispute? So the board, the National Electoral Board of Ethiopia, was in charge of investigating, cancelling election results, ordering re-election, and so on. And when the dispute is related with counting, vote counting, or the ballots, there are different stages of how to bring how the stakeholders could bring their disputes. So if they have a dispute over the counting at the polling station, then they can bring their dispute directly to the election officer, and the election, and then if the dispute is at the constituency level, then they have to bring the dispute over the committees which are established at that level. If the stakeholders or the disputing party do not agree with the decision of these committees, they can take their cases to the regional Supreme Court. And if it's a serious, if the dispute is related with serious irregularities and so on, the disputing parties could take their cases to the Federal High Court. So during the pre-election period in October 2005, እ.ኤ.አ and ህብረት sat together to discuss about the rule of the game, meaning how to conduct the election and so on. Finally, they agreed on 30 electoral reforms, but the government rejected a call to change the electoral system from first past the post to proportional representation. The government rejected this call. And also the government rejected the opposition's suggestion to have a representative in the National Electoral Board of Ethiopia. These two calls were rejected, but the other 30 electoral reforms were accepted and they were adopted as a law. And on the election day, relatively, it was peaceful, but both parties, that means ህብረት and ቅንጅት, stated that some of their observers, candidates were arrested. But on the evening of the election day, the Prime Minister Meles Zenawi declared a semi-state emergency for 1 month, banning all public demonstration in Addis Ababa because of for peace reasons. And after the election day, post-election period, of course, ቅንጅት filed a case to the court stating that the emergency, the state of emergency is not constitutional. Of course, the court forwarded the case to the House of Federation Council, which means for the constitutional inquiry, which is headed by Kamal Bedri, who is also the chairman of the National Electoral Board. So at the end, the court decided that the state of emergency was constitutional. But the major dispute was regarding the outcome of the election. The opposition party accused the government of election irregularities and the outcome of election. So regarding this, around 30 political parties submitted election-related complaints. Most of these complaints came from ቅንጅት ህብረት and እ.ኤ.አ. As you all know, these all are coalitions, so they have a lot of parties within them. In general, the opposition parties brought complaints in 299 constituencies. That means in 60% of the total 524 constituencies, the outcomes of the election was disputed. But the difference is that the complaint was directly submitted to the board rather than the constituencies or the polling station. This is not according to the rules and regulations. According to out of the 299, ቅንጅት filed 156 complaints, እ.ኤ.አ. 50, ህብረት 79. But the opposition parties wanted the three organizations, which is the board, the international observers, and the parties, to investigate the disputes or the complaints. However, the electoral board, instead of sending or distributing the complaints or disputes to the assigned committees and so on, they assigned 4 judges to start investigating the complaints. That was not according to the rules and regulations at that time. By early June, without adjudicating the disputes or resolving the disputes, the National Board started announcing preliminary results. This was protested by the supporters of the opposition parties, which led to violent demonstrations, and 36 to 40 people lost their life, while 100 civilians were wounded, injured, and a thousand were arrested. This is just an estimation. So on June 10, 2005, the 3 parties signed a pact, which they said they decided to establish 2 bodies, Complaints Review Board and the Complaints Investigation Panel. The board was in charge of investigating, was in charge of reviewing the complaints and recommending to the National Board, Electoral Board, whether further investigation is needed. And then the panel will be established with 3 voting members, 1 from the Electoral Board, 1 from the complaint lodging party, and another 1 from the declared winner in that polling station. This was the arrangement, what they signed on June 10, 2005. In total, there were 383 complaints for the board. At the end, 180 complaints were accepted or forwarded for further investigation. And out of these accepted complaints, in 135 constituencies, 69 were by Ganajit, 31 by Hibret, and 13 by EPRDF. So we need to notice here that all complaints submitted by EPRDF were accepted by the board. But when the investigation began, they didn't follow on the regulations they agreed on. There were a lot of irregularities and so on. So at the end, Ganajit and Hibret were not happy with the outcome of the election. And in most of the polling stations where the opposition won, re-election was announced, and re-election was conducted on August 21st, and almost the EPRDF won most of these in 31 constituencies were won by EPRDF. So let me jump to the 2006. Let me jump to the current election. For the current election, for resolving disputes, any political organization could bring their cases, and there is, of course, there are committees at each level, and these committees have to decide on each cases within a limited time period. But at the end, the disputing parties could appeal their dispute to the federal High Court. So this is just, I'm just giving you a brief introduction of the rules and regulations regarding disputes, post-election disputes. So my question, when I look at the 6th general election or for the upcoming election, is that do stakeholders know the procedures of filing electoral claims or disputes? I don't think they know, or I don't think all stakeholders know the procedures. I don't believe they will follow all these rules and regulations to resolve any post-election disputes. As we have witnessed in 2005 election, none of the stakeholders followed the previously established rules and regulations to resolve their disputes. They even went further to agree on a new form of resolving disputes, electoral disputes. So I have a reservation on that, and there is a need to disseminate more information in this regard for the upcoming election. The other question is that, do stakeholders trust electoral dispute resolution institutions? Do they trust the federal court? Do they trust each committees to resolve their disputes? I think it's better than the 2005 election when it comes to the board. Previously, the board leader, Kamal Badri, was also the head of the Supreme Court. So it seems like it's one institution, but now they are different two institutions, and the special courts are being established for the upcoming election, which are specifically focused on election. But some, of course, in the current time, we also see that some political parties took their disputes to the court, but other stakeholders are calling independent institutions to investigate some kind of electoral dispute and so on. So it's half and half. And when it comes to outcome disputes, that's to be seen. And the other question is, are the political party leaders ready to dialogue and resolve disputes through negotiation, and also as per the electoral rules of the country? I have a reservation on this as well, because we can see some examples how they handle disputes in pre-election period. Actually, they couldn't even sit together and dialogue with the national board when it comes to adopting the new electoral rules and regulations. So the post-election period, there might be violence if the stakeholders do not follow the rules and regulations to resolve their disputes. So thank you very much. አመሰግናለሁ. Dankeschön for your time.
Thank you very much, Jalele, for the excellent presentation. I think the audience have got now enough information. The audience might be really happy having this professional information concerning the election with the problems in Ethiopia. So I would like now to open the floor to raise questions and for comments from the audience side, and accordingly the scholars will be providing them with replies and answers according to the question raised. So floor is open, and raise your questions by sending it on the chat. I have already got the first questions in hand. So let me start with the questions, and after seeing the content of the question, we'll then agree whether one of you scholars can answer this. I leave it to you, which takes over, or you both can comment on the question. This could be also another option. So let me read the first question I received. The first question is from John Amilcar Schmidt. So the question says, since Dr. Gebeye, our scholar, is a constitutional lawyer, could we ask him to kindly explain a little bit the question of the constitutionality of the decision in 2020 to postpone elections, which was bitterly rejected by the TPLF and triggered the violent confrontation later? So it's a really excellent question which fits to the whole situation. So we could start with this question. It is addressed directly to Dr. Gabaye, so I'll leave the floor for you.
Thanks so much. I think it is an excellent question. So in many ways, the decision to postpone the 2020 election was somehow an important decision in many ways. Of course, it was contested. It was a very contested decision, and but in any case, once House of Federation, which has the power to say what the Constitution is, then all government institutions, political parties, and all others have the obligation to obey, I guess. So even if we may not agree with the outcome or the reasoning of the House of Federation, but once that institution decides that it is constitutional to extend the election, then that becomes the law of the country. But I agree that that decision was in many ways contested, and it may have also contributed for some of, not all, but some of the political developments that come after that. But in any case, it is the House of Federation which says that, this is a law. Then even if we don't agree with that, we have to abide by that decision.
Okay. Maybe to add to this question before going to the next one, I was thinking of asking you whether it was given as a reason by the government to postpone the election because of Corona. So it sounds logic, but the condition, when we see in Ethiopia what was going on during that time, the public gathering were not forbidden. There were even governmental institutions having big meetings. So it was contradictory. And I don't know how you see this, seeing this perspective.
Yeah, I mean, even I also wrote a brief to the Council of Constitutional Inquiry. They asked people, constitutional scholars, to submit their opinions, about the matter. And my proposal was to amend the Constitution, which brings all political parties together, so that we may not engage in other activities. But then there are also other ways of, there may not be only one right answer. But in any case, there are, I think, great concerns, both in terms of, legal and also factual, as you say, issues. But in any case, I think now we may not engage in a counterfactual exercise. Many things happened after that, and it may be a good idea to think, how can we even stop another, bigger problem? Yeah, so that would be my approach. But I totally agree with you that there were some both factual and legal issues.
Okay, thank
Can
you,
I say something?
Doctor.
Can I say
Please,
something?
please.
So when we see that 2020, the reason why it was extended and so on, as for me, based on the concept of jurisprudence and so on, it's according to the Constitution, because at that time most activities were not allowed, all weddings were not allowed at that time. All meetings were closed. Even the national board, the electoral board, even mentioned that they were not able to train election officers and so on because of the state of emergency. So when the country is in a state of emergency, based on even though there is no specific law on the constitution, there are different options, but based on the jurisprudence and so on, the House of Federation have the right to decide to extend the election. I will share the link of the article I wrote. Feel free to disagree with it, but I just want to mention my opinion on that.
Thank you very much, Jalale. It is, I think, excellent explanation. I hope that the one who raised this question from the audience is also satisfied with your answers, explanation. If not, you can keep on chatting, keep on asking. I think the floor is still open. So I would like to go to the next question. It is from a friend of mine, Mr. Dawit Bereketap, who is also in the audience, who came from Hanover. Great to have you here, Mr. David. So the question is like that formulated. Which obstacles to the success of the electoral process are considered to be the most critical ones, and why? So I would say let's keep on doing for both scholars to give their opinion. So let's start with Dr. Beriun again. Is the question clear?
So what?
Yeah.
Could you please repeat it before? Could you
Shall
please
I repeat again?
Yes.
Okay. The question raised by Mr. Dawit Bereketap says, which obstacles to the success of the electoral process are considered to be the most critical ones, and why?
Yeah, I mean, those are very, very great questions. I think there are many critical issues related to their election, but I think the security situation, or at least the factual reality of the country, may be one of the things which hugely impact the election. Regardless of laws, institutions, what's happening in the country, the security situation is one big issue, I guess. And the other important issue, which may have also impact, is trust in institutions, trust in courts, trust in the electoral board, and also trust among political groups and political parties. Some of them already decided that they couldn't really trust the process, so they boycotted the election. And some of them are, the other day, even in Somali region, some of the opposition parties, they complained that they were not able to perform some of their activities, and they asked the election board, so on and so forth. So I would say that the security situation is one, lack of trust in institutions, and also within political actors and political parties. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Maybe Jalila, could you say some words about this question?
Sure, I would love to.
Okay.
As Beriun said, of course, lack of trust towards institutions, specifically towards electoral institutions. As I mentioned, there are three electoral institutions: the rules and regulations, the institution which implements the rules and regulations, and the one which resolves the disputes. So when I say it now, most people trust the electoral management body, which is the one in charge of implementing the rules and regulations. But how many people trust the new rules and regulations of the election? That's in quotation. And also, how many people trust the courts or the established committees or in each level of election, at the polling station, at the constituency level, and so on? How many stakeholders trust these institutions to bring their disputes to be settled by these institutions? In general, if a stakeholder doesn't trust an institution which is in charge of resolving dispute, they won't bring their dispute to this institution because they already know that this institution is biased and they don't trust it. So they will find another way to settle their disputes. Most of the time, the other way is violence. Through violence, they want to push everyone to sit at the negotiation table, and they want to achieve what they want through violence. This is evidence done by a lot of researchers. The other problem is weak institutions as well. Our institutions are weak to implement anything at this time. They are weak to function. They are weak to implement any decisions. So weak institutions also contribute for this. For instance, if the court decides to arrest a leader, which police or which institution is willing to do that? So we also are facing with weak institution. The third one is that the lack of the politicians, the lack of tradition for the politicians to sit and dialogue and to resolve their dispute through dialogue. There is this lack of tradition. I'm not saying tradition bahalawi at the local level, but at the politician level. We are not used to resolving our dispute through dialogue. We are standing in our extreme end of line, and we don't have a tradition of sitting, dialoguing, and coming together to find a peaceful way to resolve elections. So these three things I see as a problem to resolve any future disputes, which for me personally scares me, is the outcome of the election. How are we going to resolve? Are we learning from the 2005 what we missed as a chance? Because we cannot be a democratic country within one day, but we need to grab what we have. And this is another opportunity that came within 15 years, I guess. So this will be my answer for this question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well explained. I continue to the next question. We are getting more and more questions, which is good. The next question is regarding the National Board of Election. What is your view of the appointed National Board of Election of Ethiopia? I admire their devotion and trying to do in a country where there are many problems. But in this regard, what happens in the areas where elections cannot be held at this moment, for example, like in the state of Tigray? So this is a question raised by one from the audience. So Dr. Bariun, I would like to ask you again to start answering this question.
Okay, thanks so much. I think that's a great question. You know, in some ways, I agree with, I agree that the National Election Board, in terms of its appointment process, it was really a new board with a new law and things like that. All these somehow confer some sort of confidence or independence. But at the same time, you know, the National Election Board is just one institution. It may not do everything by itself. It didn't have any police force or a security, so it has to work with the government, which means it has to work with the federal government and also the regional governments. And these days, sometimes it may not be easy to work with regional governments. For example, there has been an issue between one of the regions, Harari region, and the election board, Somali region and election board. In their disputes, they were saying that if you are not deciding what we want, we may even boycott the election. And these are regional governments. So there are different interests within the government also because of the federal system, and there are also, you know, different administrative, bureaucratic, you know, practices that may also impact the functionality of the board. I think it's true that the board members are very respected people, but they are also working in an environment where, you know, as Jalali said, there are weak institutions. The level of democratic culture is not that much strong. So we may, you know, they may not, even if they have the willingness, they may not have the capacity to execute what they want. Related to elections in Tigray and also other places, I think these are factual questions. We don't really know when the next elections will be held. I mean, these are very factual issues. If there is an enabling environment, if there is peace, then, you know, we may have election. You know, otherwise we may not know when we will have elections in those places.
Okay, thank you very much. I would say, instead of repeating the same question for Jalele, since the time is also approaching and we have still 2-3 questions more, I would go to the next question so that Jalele will get the chance to reply. The next question is also from a friend of mine, Engineer McQuanant, who's in the audience. He's got this precise question. Ethiopia has 10 regions. There is lack of rule of law in the least 5 regions. There are no possibilities to organize. So how can we talk about a fair election in 2021? Jalali, please.
Yes. Let me start from the last question. Compared to the previous elections, there is a lot of political space right now. There is no, for instance, for some parties, they cannot organize, they cannot campaign in other regions because of the way our political organization is being conducted, meaning that it's based on ethnicity. For instance, those parties which are preaching the concept of being one, being an Ethiopian, not focused on a specific ethnic group, they are facing a lot of problems in conducting campaigns. Even their candidates are being killed. The same is true for one ethnic-based political party to campaign outside of their own region. That's the problem. But that is not the problem specifically related to this election. This is a problem of how the political area space is organized or being organized in our country. So that's what we need to work as a country to change this political organization. if it's needed. But for me, the political space is better than the previous one. We need to grab the chance. We need to, the opposition parties need to grab this opportunity and also take the seats. Either it's 1, 20, 100, they need to take the seats, and then we can go through it together. We can change together. That will be my short answer. Regarding what happens to, I just want to say something about what happens to the places where election is not being held currently. Previously, also election is not being held simultaneously in all regions. For instance, elections in Somali region is being held always a few months after the main election. For instance, elections are being held in May. In Somali, it's being held in August or September. So whenever there is a relative peace in these regions, this is not only in Tigray. This is also this might also concern West Oromia, Kallam Wallagga, Horro Gudru, Amaro region, Amaro zone in South region, and also in Afar, three Kabbales where the Somalis and Afars are having dispute. So there might be solutions in the future to have the election later. Out of the 24 something thousand not open election, only 116 or something like that are not open because of security reasons. The others are not open because of logistical problems, transport, and so on. So relatively, it's not too much. It's 4,000.
I think we are running slowly out of time. The last question I have now in hand. With this, we conclude, I think, our discussion. The rest could be continued maybe in the Zoom with the Ethiopia closed edition. So the last question, maybe for Dr. Barihun, let's make it a final question. What would you advise the election board to correct before the election at all? Dr. Barihun, you got that question?
Yeah, yes, I got it. But I think this is a very difficult question.
Make it in small conclusion.
Yeah, so, you know, I would say that I think the problems are immense, but, you know, they should plan to make a free election, and also they should also acknowledge the problems they face. You know, at the end of the day, they have the responsibility, you know, the House of Federation previously, and also the Council of Constitutional Inquiry, in postponing the election, in deciding, you know, in a certain way. Now we are also in the same situation. So this election is important. We don't know what will come after this. And as a body responsible for this task, I think they should do, you know, they should take responsibility, and they should elect the Ethiopian people, and also, I don't know, government, if they are facing some problems. So, you know, in any case, I would emphasize that they should take responsibility for whatever they are doing. You know, a lot's happening. You know, there is not much time, but yeah. So that will be my short answer.
Great.
Can I add something? Can I add something? If I may.
Okay, please. In
1
short
minute.
form.
Yes,
Okay.
2 minutes.
Okay.
For
okay.
The national board is a very neutral body compared to the previous ones. Before we start, like, we need to see how this board was elected. Previously, it was just suggested by the Prime Minister, and they were approved by the House of Representatives. But according to the new regulation, anyone could submit the name, and they are shortlisted, and a few proposals are presented to the House of Representatives, and that's how they are selected. That's one point. The second point is that, as I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, election is a cycle. It's not a one-day thing. But for the national board, the current national board was elected after mid-2019 for 2020 election May. So they had almost, let's say, let me be generous and give them 1 year for 2020 election, but it was extended to 2021. So they didn't have time to prepare everything on time. The rules were adopted. One of the rules were adopted in 2020 or end of December 2019, if I stand to be corrected. But a few, it's not even 1 month before the election. So there are challenges, but what they are doing currently, how they are responding to disputes, how they are basing their argument to resolve the disputes are according to the rules and regulations. I'm following how they are trying to resolve these disputes. So for me, the national board is trying their best. Whenever they are facing problems, they are talking to the government, they are writing letters publicly to the regional offices, to the regional governments, to the police, whenever they arrest candidates and so on. So they are trying to be transparent compared to the previous national boards. So they are trying their best, but the time is limited for them as well. So there are a lot of challenges. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the whole discussion and really appreciate for your briefing and explanation. I think we had a very good time. I enjoyed it myself. So I finally give the word now to close the whole program to the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung representative. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Haile. Thank you very much to the two speakers. That was very informative. I think it also shows that some of the setting has improved and that there is at least some hope that things will improve this time. It is a very challenging situation right now. I think we need to acknowledge that, and it's also from a beginning definitely it challenges these elections. I think we also heard that from everyone. I think we will continue this discussion also after the election to look forward. Meanwhile, we hope that there will be improvements in the situations, that the suffering which we hear from right now will not get worse and will get some more attention. I think let's keep our hopes up to that. Meanwhile, thank you very much to Ethioberlin.e.V for organizing that. It can be the start of more cooperations. And yeah, for me, thank you very much for all we almost had 50 people at some time. And it shows that there's a very big interest in that topic. And yeah, so I will say good evening to you and see you soon.
Okay, Tadessa, please finalize by closing remarks.
Okay, thank you everybody. I thank you very much for attending this event, and I hope that we will see each other again in June and August. We thank you also again the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung. We continue the event with the Ethioberlin Zoom platform, just in Amharic too now. So, thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Have a good night.
Have a good night.